Welcome to the Learning Reinvented Podcast, brought to you by myself, James Poletyllo, and the team at the Learning Effect. There are lots of learning podcasts out there, so we wanted to do something slightly different. In this episode, we'll be looking at how organisations can approach change in a different way. I'm delighted to welcome Sue Noble and Ket Patel to the podcast. Thank you for joining us today. Do you want to introduce yourselves and tell our listeners a little bit more about you?
Yeah, fantastic. Shall I start, Ket?
Yeah, please.
Fine. Okay. Hi, my name is Sue Noble, and I run an organisation called Noble Learning, where I deliver leadership programs, but I specialise in coaching and mentoring. So I work with organisations, private and public sector, to help them develop either internal coaches or develop their managers in how to use the principles of coaching and mentoring as part of their everyday role. I've recently had a book published where the subject is around coaching people through organisational change. And that's followed on with me being fortunate enough to work with Ket in how we can actually take this further within organisations and just sort of really change some mindsets around change and leadership and coaching and all of that. Over to you, Ket.
Thanks. And it's James, good to be back. I was on an early episode, which you can kind of maybe reference as well. But yeah, hi, I'm Ket Patel. I'm a founder of an organisation called Change Reactions. Change Reactions is a community dedicated to bridging the gap between university, college leavers and finding the path into organisational change. I'm really surprised by the number of people that do the role of change management, project management, business analysis before really knowing that it's actually a career. They're doing all sorts of things. And I want to try and shortcut that. So that's what Change Reactions is about. I'm also a business change analyst and consultant, and I work predominantly within technology implementation, really specialising in helping organisations figure out how to get their businesses ready for the change and specifically getting them adopting the new ways of working. And then finally, I spend a lot of my time advocating for good change management practice. And I do that through the Change Management Institute, of which I'm a volunteer, supporting external collaborations, so making other organisations aware that we exist and what our purpose is and how we can work to help achieve sort of business outcomes. So that's me.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you back, Ket. As you said, you were one of our early guests, so you were actually on our second ever podcast, and we're now kicking up towards sort of episode 70-ish. So yeah,
What's
way
changed?
back when, yeah, quite a bit's changed. You know, we've had lots of guests, and we've got possibly a bit more polished. Or you'll be able to tell me that from where we were at when we were doing those embryonic early episodes, but. You know, you've got quite an eclectic background between the two of you, lots of fingers in lots of pies. And I know sort of you coming together has created this collaboration and a bit of a meeting of minds. And you've got some thoughts about how organisations should approach change for the better. But do we want to start by outlining what is the general current approach organisations take to managing or working with change?
Yeah, I'm happy to sort of jump in here. I think there's a really good graphic by an organisation called Idea Leap, which shows a sort of Gantt chart of activities that happen in a project and when change managers sort of are typically brought in. And I'll share it with you because I think it's quite a good graphic. But the realisation and most often than not is when the change is about to land on people, that's when they decide to think about how we're going to get people ready, right at the very end, right when actually it's really important that people are ready, prepared, know what's coming, are ready to kind of accept the changes and start to adopt them. And that leaves a tall mountain for business change people to come in and try and manage on behalf of the business. And the challenge with that is not only is it new to the change profession coming in to try and support the organisation, but it is alien to the operations people we're expecting to adopt these changes and help us realise the benefits. So bringing people in really late to change to help manage it and even inform them of it, seems to be a common approach that organisations take because they silo the development of change ideas into this thing called a project, and they try to get it over the fence to people by sort of just going, hey, we've developed something really cool for you, you'll love it, and making an assumption that it will be obvious and transparent and intuitive. And the reality when it meets is anything but that. And then change managers are brought in to try and ease that burden. And that kind of repeats itself every project that gets ever started, right? Which isn't really a sustainable way to manage change in organizations. So I think there's a few different things we could do.
And actually sort of brings me on to the reason why I co-wrote the book, Coaching People Through Organisational Change, is because what we noticed was that change tends to happen on quite a linear process. It meant that people were told what to do, expected to sort of be motivated to change. So what we wanted to do was to look at how we can develop change practitioners in using a different style and approach. And that different style and approach was using a coaching style and approach. So really it's about, instead of just telling people what to do, it's about engage with them, have conversations. But what we sort of realized is that maybe not all change practitioners understood what coaching was or how to use it, or maybe they were saying they were coaching but using something else.
And if I just want to sort of add another dynamic that is sort of making us think about this right now, is that organizations, as a result of what's happened over the last several years, have wanted their organizations to become more adaptable and agile to change, right? And what they've done is they've applied a process to try and get people to be more adaptable. If we chunk this stuff up into smaller bits, people will be able to deal with it better. But all they're doing is still heavy loading the very top of that with loads more stuff. So chunking up lots more stuff into smaller bits doesn't make it easier to deal with, especially when you don't give people the behaviors that was required to respond and react to change in positive ways, and you actually manage the volume. And so one of the things we're really conscious of is, if organizations really, really want to become adaptable to change, they can't keep going at it initiative by initiative. They have to think about, how do we ready our individuals within the organization from the very front line to the very top to be ready to deal with change on a personal level and to help others deal with it on a practical level. And that's kind of where we're trying to move towards, is creating an agile organization means developing individuals which can respond to change in proactive and healthy ways, whilst the system is structured to deliver the volume of change they can cope with. And that's a very different way of thinking about change, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I go back and recognize all of those things you've talked about. My career was sort of created from being that learning professional, being stood at the end of a change initiative, often training out complete rubbish, if I'm being honest, or stuff where, you know, the line managers or people in the business were pushing back because it maybe hadn't been thought through, or there were challenges to that process. And I absolutely recognize that wrapping things up in a project, and, you know, a project is a defined period of time, there's energy, there's focus behind it, and then everyone disappears and you're left with this stuff that may or may not have landed, and may or may not have embedded, and may or may not have any resource or impetus to keep it alive and realize benefits. And, you know, I've seen through my career and been part of those sort of problems that they've happened, and, you know, learn and step back to think there are better ways of doing it. And from what I'm hearing from you, you're seeing a better way of doing it, that almost creating that architectural or that cultural something in the business, that there's a better way of doing it. So do you want to expand on that and tell the listeners what you think that means? Because we've had a sort of top line, but do you want to delve down into a bit more detail for us?
Well, it's really interesting because I mean, we're starting with line managers, and one of the, from my experience of being a sort of change sort of manager within businesses, I spend a lot of my time trying to help a line manager understand the changes that are going to happen for their team. And there's some practical bits of that, which is, you know, okay, well, what is the change? What are the impacts that we're going to expect to see? How do we have to work differently, behave differently? What does that mean for the processes we follow? So all of that kind of change impact that I would bring to the table, I have to kind of be able to communicate to the line managers and the staff. But what I'm often doing is the line manager doesn't have the capacity or headspace to think about change. So actually, I'm an extra set of hands for the person to do that on behalf of the team while they focus on keeping everything stable. And so the challenge we're sort of seeing there is that actually, if line managers were better equipped with the sort of thinking I bring to the table and were given the capacity to do it, well, then actually they could do some of these things without needing someone like myself all the time. And actually, they could take a little bit more of the responsibility and the onus for making it happen. And I think that's where we've had some of my greatest observation is that it gets stuck there in the middle, right, from execution into the teams you want to adopt it, because they don't see it as their job. They see managing the operations to be stable and predictable as their job, and that someone else will manage change on their behalf, which means you always have this friction about what's important for them. Is it managing the change, or is it managing the business as usual? Well, push comes to shove, they're always going to go business as usual, because that's what they think they're paid to do, and we've sort of educated management that that's what they are paid to do. And I think that's where we're starting to think about the change in mindset is actually, if we manage to turn it so that we're always managing change, it's just the size and scale of it means you might need to bring some other people in, and sometimes you can do it yourself and you've got the right tools, then all of a sudden you've got a very different dynamic for managing change in an organization.
Well, what comes to mind really as Ket was speaking there was the fact that we develop line managers in various skills, how to manage their teams, how to communicate with their teams. What we're looking to do really is to help them understand, well, your role requires you to be an ambassador for change as well. You can use words like ambassador, catalyst, change agent, whatever it is, but they don't tend to see themselves in that role. And as part of that, it's about, okay, how can I connect with my team? Because even the number of line managers now that I go into organizations and do some training, and the lack of communication, the lack of one-to-ones, the lack of connection they have is just staggering, really. And in order to embrace and get people embraced in this change, then it's important that we have those discussions and sit down with people and say, so how is this impacting on you? And being able to sell the change to their teams, even though they may not believe in it themselves, they have to be energized enough and enthusiastic enough to try and sell it to teams, and also to work out what support do their teams need. But interestingly, what support do they need? Where are they getting their own support? So that's another dilemma which we're facing.
And I think that's the thing, right, is we're trying to say, as a change manager, I bring this thinking. As a coach, I bring this thinking. And together, they're really powerful, but you don't need all of it. As a line manager, you need some elements of both that would really ease the management of change where it often gets stuck. And that's what we're trying to, I don't think we've figured out the right balance of the detail that we bring from coaching and sort of change management. That's what our exploration is around, and why we're sort of doing these conversations and having conversations with other practitioners. We're trying to find that right balance of what does it mean to upskill a line manager so that they have the right tools, techniques, and confidence to manage change on behalf of themselves and others. And that is where we're sort of trying to focus our efforts, right? Because we've both got these thought that we can empower line managers with those skills.
I think it's some interesting points you raise. I recognise some of it, but I also recognise some of the challenges, because, looking back at the issues I've had in my career, or, around predominantly driving some level of change in organisations, if the line manager, it doesn't believe it's their job, the organisation doesn't state it's their job, the organisation doesn't create the time for it to be their job, it doesn't reward them for doing that part of the job, and it doesn't almost empower them to help evolve and make the change work, I can see why change bounces off organisations. And I've had the direct conversation with line managers of they hunker down. I've had someone say to me, I'm just going to keep my head down and wait for this one to go away. Yeah. And I think that, there's a really honest view of line managers that they feel, my job, there is no impetus apart from someone else's pet project centrally or elsewhere that drives me to embed and take on this change. So I think, there's the upskilling and giving the tools to the manager, but there's also creating the playing field for them to to be able to do that and to be empowered and rewarded and all of those other things. So I think you've got two sides of that to look at. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think for me, it's really important that the premise of why we're doing this is that the organization truly wants to be adaptable to change. So if the organization truly wants to be adaptable to change, they have to truly align their priorities on the things that are important to them. And they have to prioritize that we've got to change over keeping stuff the same. And that means how we measure performance, and that means how we support people's time and capacity. And if those two things are in place, then if line managers have the responsibility of driving change, then they can quite well within their rights start saying to people, hey, I've only got 5 days a week, right? And you're asking me to do all of this stuff over here that is my day job, and you're asking me to do new. Well, guess what? I'm going to put some of that old stuff at risk, and I'm going to put some of that new stuff as a priority because that's what you've told me you want. And if that's the case, I'm happy to push forward because I can't magic up an extra day in my work week, not persistently. But the point is, it's about alignment at a senior level for this organizational adaptability, and then affecting that with the right people in the right places with the right skills. And that's the bit that's missing right now, is we're doing the skills development as an ad hoc plaster approach to trying to become agile. We're putting processes in, but without the follow-up. We're putting training in, but without the ability to practice. We're just creating more of a mess for our people. And I think there's just, the people that will want to do this will get it, and they'll buy into it, and it will work top down and bottom up. But I don't think it's for everyone.
Well, what comes to mind is we're talking about cultural change, and we're talking about cultures, organizations changing their way of thinking. And as you were saying that, James, about some of these challenges, absolutely right. But how on earth can an organization expand, increase, improve if that's their way of thinking, and if that's how they employ their line managers? And something else which Ket and I are often talking about is it needs to go back to recruitment. It's almost as if, what are HR doing about this in terms of bringing in people who have the right attitude to change? So if we have people who just want to hunker down for whatever reason, is that the right person for the job? And it's almost as if line management is expanding, because I come from a background of HR. Many years ago, I sort of worked my way from HR into learning and development. And I always remember that change when all of a sudden HR was saying, right, now managers have to take responsibility for their own HR issues. We're here to support. And it feels a little bit as if change management is going the same way. You have to be responsible for change in whatever way that is, in order for progress to happen.
You raise an interesting point, right? Because we're in danger of overloading the responsibilities of a line manager. But I do think I'd be interested, actually, James, around the kind of one of my pet peeves, I guess, as having been through a management development program, is it feels like it's an accolade. It's a merit to achieve, right? I'm a manager within this organization. I get given this training course about how to be an effective manager. And it's all very pat on the back from my own experience of having been through one, but not much behavioral change, not much kind of motivation to go out into the world of work in the organization and really lead the organization forward, really champion change. It's more about, make sure you're doing the things we ask of you and you're doing them diligently. And I think that in itself is a foundational problem in the way we develop talent in organizations. And Sue's point's really important, and exactly why I've set up Change Reactions. We aren't arming people when they come into organizations with the skills to be able to adapt to change. And actually, when they get into organizations, what we tell them is do as we ask you to, right? Keep doing the same. Don't get too far out of your box because we know best. And it's really unhelpful behaviors to be teaching people who are energized, motivated, often coming up with new ideas. And after a while, you get used to hearing that rhetoric and it just becomes part of your DNA. And Change Reactions is trying to stop that. But more importantly, I think if organizations want an adaptable organization, they need to stop it themselves. They need to develop their talent in a way which is change ready, resilient, adaptable. And these aren't processes, these are behaviors that we practice time and time again, right? And we get better over time. And that's where we need to be focusing. And I think HR has HR and L&D, which is exactly why we're here. HR and L&D have a huge role to support us in helping make this change happen. And we're really keen to get feedback from people in this vicinity.
I think there's lots of interesting things you've talked about there, recruiting for change behaviours, about training and developing people to have change behaviours. I think there's so many systematic issues that may stop people, so the whole organisation doesn't change and drives out change behaviours. It drives compliance behaviours and it drives delivery behaviours rather than maybe driving change behaviours. And if you're going to get your HR team and everyone else on board, everyone needs to buy into that mission, because HR need to be fixing their bit. And I think that's where sometimes some of these big things fall down, because I would not consider myself a normal L&D person, because I think I've always been in that camp of, when I've delivered management development programs, they're not to tick a box, they're for a purpose, they're to develop the behaviors we want within our leaders. And there's always been, for every program I ever did when I was in house, it would at least be 25% change, which was probably not enough. Yeah. But underpinning that is the behaviors of, for me, it was always around managing yourself, managing others, influencing, managing delivery and managing change. Because in essence, that was sort of my model I built up myself in my head of what worked in the sort of operational businesses I was in. But you'd have to then go back and help people create the space, because if you're entirely driven by someone who is measuring and monitoring you and rewarding you to just deliver delivery, not to manage change, and that sits in isolation. And then I love the recruitment point you've raised, Sue, because in one of my organizations, I started as in L&D and management development and trying to change that culture, and actually went and took over the recruitment function and built a recruitment function, because as quickly as I could try and mold and change what we were getting, what I was getting thrown into the bottom was completely the wrong people that weren't aligned to that way of thinking. So there is a whole system thinking, and everyone needs to play their part. So I think there's huge amounts of challenges, and engaging with that HR and an L&D team is really key to that. Now, if we roll forward and think nirvana, and you've got to this place where you've got this organization that's completely bought into delivering change, and they believe that's what they should be doing, and then you've got these very empowered and motivated and targeted and skilled line managers delivering, facilitating and supporting their people through change. I might be one of those coaches or change professionals or L&D or HR people sat in the middle thinking, I'm out of a job here. So do you think that puts them out of a job?
Oh, a very interesting question. And actually, it's similar to, so when I'm designing and developing managers in delegation skills, for instance, one of the fears is, well, if I delegate this stuff, would there still be a job for me? And absolutely, there will be a job for you, because it enables you to do your work, what you're paid to do, instead of doing the operational stuff. And actually, you're paid to do more of the strategic stuff. So in terms of, will coaches be out of a job? I don't believe so, because there's various types of coaching. You have executive coaching. People come in from, let's say, I will go into an organisation to coach people on a formal basis. So that will never put internal coaches out of a job, for instance, because they are there maybe to coach different levels of the organisation, not just higher levels. Also, in terms of management coaching is very different to me training internal coaches, because they're learning the principles of coaching. They're not actually learning how to be formal coaches. So I believe that there is always going to be a place for external coaches, internal coaches, because they play a different role. They are doing the more formal stuff, as opposed to line managers who are taking the principles and using it as part of their everyday job. You know, it's like doing more asking, doing less telling, doing less advising, encouraging people in how to think for themselves.
Yeah, and I mean, the first thing is, I don't even to get to nirvana. I think we're some number of years away. So I think Sue and I are safe. But look, joking aside, yeah, look, do I want to be going into an organisation saying the same thing over and over and over and over and over again? That please think about the change impacts to your people. Here's a method of doing so. Not really. It doesn't excite me every single time I go in. What excites me is seeing an organisation develop its own capability to kind of mature itself. And actually, where I think change managers will end up is helping understand what capability an organisation has and helping them develop that capability internally in their people. And that is, as long as organisations keep starting to build themselves, the more we're going to need people to think about how do you build change capability. So it's no longer about actually doing the changing. It's about helping an organisation figure out what does change mean for them and how do they build the skills in their organisation to tackle it and how do they continue to mature that. And that's a very different proposition, I think, for change management professionals. And I think that for me is it's an interesting dynamic to take the profession in.
Yeah. I mean, I might be going off on a tangent here, but one of the things which I almost like I get on my soapbox about is organisations who set up training programs and they ask managers from each of the different divisions to come and attend. And those managers are expected to go back to their teams and make it work. And I've often said to L&D professionals saying, why don't you work with the team as a whole? And this would work amazingly well for what Ket and I are trying to do. And that is to let's go into a whole team with the manager and we train the team in the same stuff we would train the manager in to get them on board and get their buy-in. So they understand why it's important to embrace change and looking at what are we trying to do as an organisation rather than trying to get the managers to try and sell the stuff once they go back. And often they run out of steam because they get lots of resistance. People aren't interested. So that's, I think, a really big thing. Let's work with teams. Might take longer, might need more investment, but at least it would work. It would be more effective.
Yeah. And actually, I want to pick up on a really, not such an obvious point around learning the skills of certainly coaching from my own experience, but change as well, is that I think there is this inability for people to handle uncertainty for themselves. And that rubs off in the way they create the space for other people to handle uncertainty. Now, if I'm a little unnervy or worried about the change that's coming and I've got people looking up to me, I'm going to somehow either exude that in the way I behave or it's just going to be visible to others, right? So if I don't get good at managing uncertainty for myself, I'm really going to struggle to do it for other people. And I think this is where coaching has its biggest offer, just generally. I love Sue and Amy's book when it aims itself at change managers, because I'll be honest, a lot of change managers are very process oriented because they're partnered with project management, which is very process oriented. Some of the best change managers think about the fact that none of us can control the outcome of change. All we can do is take actions that can help us get to where we hope we want to go. But anything can come up. Any uncertainty could be put in front of us. So we have to react to that in ways which are positive, helpful. Sometimes we won't react in positive, helpful ways, and we have to kind of consider why that is and see what we might do different. That's all mindset. That's all about how does a coach approach the fact that we're disconnected from the outcome, but we are able to create the environment that might increase the likelihood of the outcome happening. And I think that's, for me, is coaching is really fundamental, not just to kind of change managers, as Sue's book highlights, but it's also fundamental to every person in an organization. And then tools from change management really help actually the practical aspects of navigating change. And so it's a really powerful combination for an individual just to think about for themselves.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I just think if change managers are struggling, then and you say about that capacity, building that capacity, actually engaging in an external coach or even an internal coach is a way to help them work through that, talk through that. Now, what are those strategies they can use to help them manage their time better? What confidence do they have in speaking with the people they need to speak with in order to say, I'm struggling, I can't cope with this, I need to do something differently. So a coach is really valuable to have that discussion with somebody who's impartial, who isn't going to tell them what to do, is going to help them to come to wherever they need to get to.
I think you've taken us through, a really broad range of things that you're doing. Now, I'm going to put my cynical L&D hat on and say I'm sat there and I'm looking at this and going, well, I'm an L&D person already providing change thinking or some, managing change workshops or whatever they might be doing. What's fundamentally different about this approach?
It's a really good question, and I'll be honest. Like I've got experience of a handful of organisations where I think the offer of helping people understand change is there, but it's an option. It's not a mandatory. It's not part of my development as a strategic approach. So I think that the challenge I'm seeing is that even if we've got the thinking or we've got the content to give to people, which I don't know we do have in the way I think it should be sort of developed and which Sue and I are working on. But even if we've got it, I don't think we're deploying it from an L&D, talent management, HR, professional development perspective to the organisation, which is a strategic win. It's not being thought of as, if we get this deployment of knowledge right and we give people the opportunity to practice it, we create something very different as an organisation. And it's a bit like what happens with change. If we just do it at the time we need it, right, in very sporadic, people use it for the time they need it, and it might go with them to wherever they go next, but it doesn't affect the organisation because it's just one tiny little thing that gets done. So I think for me, it's about, one, if it does exist, I think we're being very pointed and not strategic enough in its deployment across the organisation. But two, I'm not convinced that actually the kind of training or the kind of content we want to arm line managers with, employees with, does exist in something that is accessible, practicable, and experiential, really, because a lot of this stuff is about, actually, how did it make me feel when I went through it? Do I understand it?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think there's lots of change management courses out there. There's lots of coaching skills courses. But what we're trying to do is combine the two, but also it's around that mindset, that change in thought process. It's about how can we do things differently. It's about combining those things in a sort of, I suppose, a clear way. It's making sense for people who are managing change. And we don't believe it's actually happening at the moment. We want to make it happen.
Right on.
I think there's a lot of training out there and learning, and again, you look across the sphere and you can find learning and training in all sorts of areas, and organizations will be providing change management training. And Ket, you might be right that it's optional. It might be an online program as part of their LMS offer. It might be something that's part of your welcome to being a manager, that's a one-day workshop and it's a one and done. It might be something optionally people can go on, or I've seen organizations sheep dip all the managers through something just in time, or even individuals. We're going to put you through a massive change, right? We're going to do a dealing with change workshop, which again tends to be a 2 hours shoehorned into an afternoon, which is probably the point where you then tell them about the change as well, as I've seen done. So all someone's doing is emotionally reacting to the change rather than actually thinking about what they might need to do differently or approach it. So I think there's lots of activity going on out there. And if you look at it from an outside and go, well, yes, we're already doing stuff. But I think what I'm hearing from you guys is it's more about how cohesive, connected and thought through that is, so that it's actually an offer that delivers some benefit to the individual and creates that culture in the organization. And if I want to flip back as an example of what we see in learning, it's again, we see lots of organizations that focus on delivering learning and they're focused on content. and that focus on content is the project to project view that I see. Is it's like we need to do this and we need to do this, and there's lots of focus and effort on a time by time basis. The organisations we work with and that deliver the best results are the ones that create the environment where learning happens all the time. So if something changes, or if we need to learn and adapt and evolve, we've already got the plumbing, the culture and the systems in place that just happens. So the content isn't the worry. It's about creating that culture and the space to do it, which is all around, like you said, having line manager behaviours, having systems and all of those things. So I think there's some real synergies between looking at how you can deliver learning or HR on a very projecty basis, or you can deliver it as a more of a cultural change piece to empower your managers and empower your organisation.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because the other thing which comes to mind for me is quite often an organisation will do like a 1 or 2 day training and that's it. And in the same way that coaching is, it runs over a number of weeks, a number of months, so that you can build on that. It's there's not enough of that reflective process that let's bring you back. And what has happened? Where have your challenges been? What has worked well? And so it just seems to be a tick box, 2 days, right, you're done now, off you go, without that ongoing support and reflective learning space. Yeah. So, yeah, that's something else. It'd be amazing if we can get more of that in place as well.
And I think that will be a big difference to working with an organisation on this as an actual piece of work, right? Is that part of it will be, let's do the imparting of the knowledge is just step one of many. Let's then reflect on it over the course of months and actual changes you're going through and see what's working, what isn't. Let's come back, let's talk about it, let's create a bit of a community around it within the organisation. And all of a sudden, then you've got some homegrown grassroots sort of change movement within your, a targeted organisation, founded in some knowledge, brought together with an internal community and really empowered with some expertise brought in as and when is needed to focus on the bits that are required. And I think that's a very different delivery mechanism for most learning and development. And I think it's much more powerful. From any courses I've been on like that have that element, it's much more lasting and impactful.
Yeah.
I think it's a really great ambition, and I think I agree with you totally that this will have more impact. So if people have listened to this conversation, are feeling inspired and they want to get involved, how do they do that?
Well, Sue and I are still on a exploration of what this topic means. So we've been speaking with line managers and we've got some really good feedback. We've been speaking with change practitioners and we're getting some good feedback. We're recognizing very soon, and now is a great example, that actually L&D, HR are a really important kind of partner in delivering this. And so we'd really love it if people want to get involved to share their experience of how developing change thinking in staff and employees is working in their organization. They can get in contact with me. I'm at Ket Patel at 2010gmail.com. I've said that wrong. Hold on. They can get in contact with me at ketpatel2010@gmail.com, and then Sue can share her email address.
Yes, mine is sue@noblelearning.co.uk.
And you can reach out to us and we'll be happy to have a conversation and just explore this topic. And I think that for us, that is right now, we're not trying to replace anyone's work. We just think there's a different way, as you said, James, actually really well, like connecting this up is the most game-changing thing for an organization. It's possibly also rethinking the way we approach the content is really useful. So we'd really love to help get that shaped in a way that means something to people in the roles doing it. I don't know if you've got other parts you want to add, Sue.
No, I think you've made a very good point. It's just we're really interested in speaking with people to get their ideas and to develop our own ideas. It's informal chats, no obligation chats. The more we talk to people who are in the thick of it and experiencing this, the better for us and the better for you as well, because you have a conversation.
Yeah, I'd probably say one thing is that Sue and I, like if you think this is the right kind of thing for your organisation and where it's at right now, absolutely reach out to us. We'd love to try and figure out something that we could do with you in partnership with you. That for us would be brilliant. At the moment, we're doing a lot of research. But actually, there isn't any better way than figuring this out and actually sitting down with an organisation and saying, right, what is it that you want your people to be doing in the future? And we've got countless thoughts about how to deliver it. We just need to shape it into something that would meet someone's need.
So you, at the point where you're doing that exploration, you're looking for some early adopters to come on and help you shape it. But where do you see that going? What do you see coming next? Or is that just following that exploration?
We've had various conversations around where it needs to go. I think, we've touched on it. There is a core content of knowledge, both from change management and coaching, we want to turn into accessible learning, supported by us and others that buy into this, right, to arm organizations with. How we do that is sort of yet to be written. We could write the course now and try and go out and sell it. We could find an organization that would help us develop it and, adjust it for different organizations. But right now, for us, we're just like, we are absolutely certain that this is something that is valuable to organizations that really want adaptability in their toolkit. And what we're doing now is just making sure that we've thought about all the things that people really get stuck by or are challenged by or will challenge us, so that we've taken it into account in our development.
Yeah, and I like to add to that, because I'm a big believer that one size doesn't fit all, and it's about making it more bespoke to the organisation, because every organisation is different. They have different needs, different outcomes, and so it is having those conversations and thinking, well, what would work for you, rather than just saying, right, we've got this course here, are you interested? So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, last thing I would say is we've also spent quite a bit of time working with sort of conference organisers, going to professional bodies, trying to just have those facilitated discussions with practitioners. So again, if you're part of a professional body within learning development, if you're a conference organiser and you'd like to talk about maybe letting us come and facilitate a workshop or something, get in touch. We're more than happy to sort of have those discussions.
That's brilliant, and really enjoyed the conversation, and supportive of where you're trying to take this. We will make sure that we share all of those connection details and any other resources in the show notes below the podcast. But I'd really like to thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Thanks for having us.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Cheers, James.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Learning Reinvented podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. If you've not already done so, please follow our podcast. And if the learning effect can help you and your organisation, please do get in touch. You can find both James and Katie on LinkedIn, and our contact details are in the show notes below.